from Asia Pacific, dari Europe, juga dari North America, Prof. Nizam.
Great.
I'll hand it over to you, Arcky and Priyanka.
Okay, so hello everyone. Good morning, afternoon, and evening to our esteemed participants, representatives from Education Attaché, dan juga dari Dikti, selamat datang. I'm Bianca. I'm the head of content and digital publishing at GIPA. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you to GIPA's latest Going Global series, Career Blueprints in Creative Design and Architecture. A little bit of housekeeping rules before we start. For those of us in the panelist section, please keep our audio muted throughout the session unless prompted otherwise. And for participants, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions, which you can submit through the Q&A box. And don't forget to put your full name, company or university, and also location. And if time permits, our moderator will give you access so that you can turn on the video and ask the questions live. Today, we proudly welcome Professor Nizam, Director General for Higher Education from the Ministry of Education and Culture, who will be providing the opening remarks for today's session. Before serving as Director General of the Higher Education, Professor Nizam is the Dean of the Engineering Faculty at Universitas Gadjah Mada, as well as a professor at the Department of Civil Engineering. He was also the Secretary of the Council of Higher Education and the Center for Educational Assessment at the Ministry of Education and Culture. Professor Nizam achieved his M.Sc and a Ph.D. From Imperial College of Science and Tech, University of London, England. Welcome, Professor Nizam. Glad to have you here today. Today, we proudly welcome also our 3 seasoned Indonesian professionals in the field of creative design and architecture. John Kudos, Managing Partner at Kudos Design Collaboratory at New York. Griffin Lim, Partner and Designer at Make Architects, Hong Kong. And Adrian Emanuel, Registered Architect at Dialog, San Francisco. On the other side of the table, we also welcome students and young professionals coming from various countries, such as our own homeland, Indonesia, from the UK, USA, Denmark, Mozambique, Russia, Nigeria, South Korea, and more. We'd also like to thank our supporting partners from IPA USA and the Ministry of Education and Culture for their support. I know we're all very excited for the event today, but before we proceed, I'd like to introduce GIPA, the host organization for this event. As a global secretariat, GIPA aims to promote business and investment links overseas through highly talented Indonesian professionals and executives working abroad, a true partner for Indonesia's economic diplomacy and human capital development. GIPA itself represents Indonesian professionals and executives working across G20 and ASEAN, who are within 8 industry groups from financial services, health and life sciences, technology, professional services, international organizations, industrial infrastructure and energy, as well as creative media. So for those of you Indonesian professionals who have not yet connected to your closest local professional hubs, there will be a feedback form, the link for which can be found in the chat box, where you can fill it out and we can try to get you connected with the relevant local professional hubs. With that being said, we're pleased to invite Professor Nizam, Director General for Higher Education from the Ministry of Education and Culture, to provide the opening remarks. Professor Nizam, the time is yours.
Maaf, Nizam, I think it's on mute. Yep.
Okay. Thank you very much, Bianca, and distinguished speakers tonight, and all distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Very good morning to all of you. Very good afternoon and good evening to everyone from all over the world. I see. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, Salam Kebajikan, and blessing be upon all of us. It's a pleasure for me to join this webinar of GIPA on creative industry and creative design and architects. I think creativity is in the DNA of Indonesian people. We know that from Aceh to Papua, there is no dance that is the same. There are no food that are the same. There are so many varieties We can see from the fabrics, from the clothes, from the culture, from the traditions. It's very rich, and that is the real artifacts of creativity. And as we can also see, this during this era of the disruption, where creativity is part of the things that people are looking for in the age where mass productions become the norms. People looking for individuality, people looking for creativity, people looking for customizations. So mass customizations is now the trend of the day. And as we can see, how creativity driven by digital economy has lifted up the Indonesian economy to some extent. As we can see, the number of startup in Indonesia is mushrooming. I think Indonesia positioned in the fifth globally in terms of startup based on local creativity and digital economy. We are, I think, above Germany, above France, Italy, Brazil, and hundreds of other countries. And this indicate how creativity and in design and also in architect, if we look at the traditional houses from Sabang to Merauke, from Miangas to Pulau Rote, there are no similar design from one region to the other. They have a unique architect and unique culture and rich in creativity of the locals. But the way we do education, we teach our students up to university level, we follow the same curriculum, the same way of teaching, going to the same classroom, meeting the same teachers. So that somehow lock the creativity of our kids. That's why now the Ministry of Education and Culture coined up the Merdeka Belajar Kampus Merdeka, which is emancipated learning, in which to unlock the creativity and potential of students of young generations to express themselves, to capitalize on the DNA of creativity of the Indonesians. So with that, I would like to welcome and open this GIPA webinar, and hope the creativity of Indonesians abroad in design and architects can also enrich and lift up the creativity and culture diversity of Indonesian students. Through the Campus Merdeka, Merdeka Belajar, we can send our students abroad to stay, to do intern in design house in the centers of development in many countries. So we do hope that GIPA can collaborate with us in unlocking the creativity and potential of our millennials. And all the best for the conference, and may God bless us all. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Prof. Nizam, for the opening remarks. Now, the following panel session will be moderated by Arcky Meraxa. Within GIPA, Arcky is our head of Americas and head of the Center of Excellence for Professional Development. Professionally, Arcky works as the Director of Strategic Initiatives and Model Governance in American Express, New York. Over to you, Arcky.
Thank you, Bianca. And if you don't mind, Bianca, I'd like to share a little bit of materials here to set the context. And if you don't mind jumping into the professional development slide. Yeah, thank you. So I think just a quick scene setting here. We expect Indonesia by 2030 and by 2050 to be like the top 5 global economy, and this is forecasted by Goldman Sachs, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and many other large companies or research firms. The issue, however, masalah besarnya, it is also expected that Indonesia will have 3.8 million shortage of skilled worker. And the definition is of skilled workers, workers with strong talent and expertise in their field, or workers that have global experience that can match up with the global stage that we're facing right now. So this issue is expected to impact Indonesia potentially with $440 billion of economic losses. So Indonesia has a talent gap, and from us at GIPA, and also supported by the various Indonesian professional community overseas, how can we close the gap and make ourselves stronger when it comes to human capital development? So our point of view is that let's figure out a solution, or let's figure out a way to close the gap by looking at initiatives that comes in two folds. One, how can we improve the number of students transitioning to professional at the global stage? Number two, how can we increase the number of professionals to executive at the global stage as well? And through this approach, I think what we want is that we want people to think about how can they think about their career globally. From our philosophy, I think if you have a global experience, if you're focusing on work that impacts internationally, that will allow you to be on par with industry standards. And this is how we want to educate, and we want to share the knowledge. What we have here today through our programs and how we do it, we try to invite Indonesian professionals who are working overseas. And there are various independent Indonesian communities, Indonesian professional communities around the world who are very, very interested to contribute back to Indonesia. The speakers are living in these regions, living in the cities, and they're very interested to share back what they've learned so far overseas directly to you, and also answer your questions. So I think this is basically like a long-term initiative that we want to do, and I think hopefully we will bring some impact towards either inspiring you, sharing you the best practices, knowledge, etc. But I think to that end, what I want to do is that probably let's jump into the main event, and I'll introduce the speakers one by one as well. So first of all, we have John Kudos. And John basically he's a managing partner of Kudos Design Collaboratory. He runs his own design firm based in New York. Previously, John has been working in Pentagram as well, a top design company. I will hold off the additional comment for later to John to also share what he does at work. Second, we have Griffin Lim, partner and designer at Make Architect Hong Kong. While Griffin also has an interesting profile where in his field of interior design, he has been working in London, he has been working in Australia, and now he's working in London. So really, he's been moving around the world. Similarly, we have Adrian, who is a registered architect at Dialog. And previously, he's been working in major architecture firm, Office of Metropolitan Architecture, OMA, and BIG, also a global architecture firm. And Adrian, I think similarly, his career, he's been moving around as well. He's been in China, he's been in Netherlands, and now in New York, and now he's in San Francisco. So hopefully, I think these set of speakers will be able to share with you what's the best practices. This is an interactive section as well, guys. Kalau ada pertanyaan, shoot. We have a question form down there. Jadi feel free to ask any questions yang whatever you have, whatever you want to know. Nanti kita bakal jawab one by one. So I think to that end, probably let's kick off. Yeah, are you guys ready, guys? All right, good. So you know what? Let's start with John. John, tell us a little bit about your work and maybe a little bit of background.
Sure. So I'm John Kudos. I am currently the managing partner of Kudos Design Collaboratory, which is a company I founded about 12 years ago now. Yeah, so I, as a managing partner and a creative director, I usually make sure that every project runs smoothly. I also, manage communications with clients and make sure they're happy with everything that we're doing. Maybe I can talk about my team a little bit. So the way we structure our team is we have a team of designers and developers, programmers. And we also have offices in New York, where I'm currently at, and also in Bandung and Jakarta. So all in all, we have about, I would say about 40 people in the company right now. But in New York, we're actually a small operation, it's about 7 people. I don't know what's so normal anymore, but I think, we do Zoom calls every morning, and there's a sense of independence right now with 1 year into COVID. everybody's working in their own time, which actually has been we're working quite well for us because we're mostly digital, and it took us about 1 week, to transition from normal working environment to a work from home environment. And so far, everyone's really happy with the setting. So there's a lot of questions, how we operate in the future, but this is where we are. And it's very collaborative in many ways, because we're also spread across in different time zones.
Thanks, John. So next up, Griffin.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Griffin. There is a bit of a few slides that we prepared for everybody, and we thought I'll take you through the journey that I had in the past 10 to 15 years of my career, and I thought it would be something quite useful for everyone to listen to in terms of the career journey that I've had. I won't talk too much about the projects, but what I'll talk through is what is memorable and why it is why I do what I do today. So if you don't mind sharing the presentation, and I'll whiz through this really quickly so that everyone's not bored. So as mentioned before, my name is Griffin Lim. And if we go to the next slide, I was born in Jakarta, and I spent a little bit of time in Perth before then moving to Sydney to do my undergrad. And also I started my career back then around about third year, around about the 2008 global financial crisis. It was after that, then I got my Bachelor of Interior Architecture. Then I spent around about 4.5 years working in Sydney in Future Space, working for a very well-known workplace strategists and designers. And then after that, as I was getting, I would say a career plateau at that time, I wanted to try something new, which is then when I moved to UK, and that's where I joined Make, where I am now. We are a British firm, and we've got a studio across in UK, Australia, and in Hong Kong. So I spent 2 years at Make in London before then going back to Sydney for a couple of years. And then from 2018, I then joined Make in Hong Kong. And then if we go to the next slide, I'll run through some of the things that I did through at the beginning of my career down to now. So at the next slide, we've got a couple of projects. So right at the beginning, I started working at a big firm, working from interiors to architecture to master planning. And this is such a joy working when you're a junior, when you're an undergrad, being able to absorb everything around you. And that for me was one of the big unlocking period of my career. And this, of course, goes with the tough job descriptions that comes with it, whether it's photocopying, scanning, delivering papers and whatnot, but it all comes very important at the beginning of my career to take me where I am now. And then the next couple of slides, if we go through, the next one is then when I started joining Future Space. At the beginning, I worked with a big team, working with such a great mentor. And one of the things that I really valued throughout that period was having such a fantastic mentor, working on workplace designs for global firms, from Microsoft to Riot Games to Schneider and whatnot. And a couple of years after that, if we go to the next slide, I was also then able to look into working on my own projects, working with the design director to deliver other types of project, and also making a little bit of your own mark within the firm. But the best time of that period was then when, if you go to the next slide, is at the first couple of years of upon graduation, we had quite a lot of time. Responsibility wasn't too high. So a dear friend and colleague of mine at the time wanted to do something different, something extracurricular outside work. So that's when we decided to do Vivid Sydney and Sculpture by the Sea. Two of these events are really big large-scale events in Australia, especially in Sydney. Vivid happens in winter, where they want to encourage people to come out to enjoy the city in winter. So this was a lighting installation that we did for that particular year. And the light that we designed at the time was designed for a previous design competition also. So we were able to do product design as well as installation at the same time. And then the next one is a Sculpture by the Sea, which is the largest free outdoor event in Australia, in Bondi, which is stretched throughout Tamarama and Bondi. So that was the fun bit through the period of the first 4 years of my career. And then it took me to London, which, if we go to the next slide, the first project that I did was a workplace fit out, transitioning from Australia to London. This was quite something more comforting for me to do a project in the sector that I was in. And if we can go to the next couple of slides, the process that I enjoy the most is seeing the concept coming to a realization at the end. And the next slide shows that in more particular, where a piece of stair, for example, need to be thoroughly thought out, from the iterations of design options to the construction ideas, down to the construction side, to then the finished product. And this is what brings me joy every day to do what I do, because every time that scaffold comes out and you see the design comes to life, there's nothing that beats that. And you know, all the blood, sweat, and tears that you spent is, you know, it's gone when you see the people using it. And of course, the next slide on this one is one of the most memorable of that project, where I was able to go to Portugal to find the stone and source it. And during that travel, I was then taken to the inside of the quarry, and it was just phenomenal to be able to stand inside a quarry and looking at the sheer scale of where we source the materials. So again, every project will bring its own memories and nuances, and this was particularly one of them. And the next one then shows Harrods Menswear, which is a project that I then worked on following that. As we all know, Harrods, if we go to the next slide, is one of the most luxurious department stores in the world. So I was quite fortunate to be able to get my hands dirty on this project, because it was so exciting to work with one of the biggest brands in the world. It was for the menswear department, and the next slide shows what the hall used to be, which is the very first pneumatic machine where the cash shoots up through the pipes down to the basement, and the workers. And at this point, it was all the ladies who then counts all the money. And so that was interesting to hear the story, how the space started and how it becomes. And the next slide then shows how the menswear department was shown at the time before we started the design, and on the right, that was the finished product. And the joy of working in the field that I do, it's beyond interiors. It's also touching across other disciplines, such as, for example, working with the visual merchandisers at Harrods to ensure the visual merchandising aligns with the designers of the space. And for this particular project, we go to the next slide. The most memorable, again, is working with the Harrods archivists. So at the beginning of this project, the joy is I sat with Sebastian, who is one of the Harrods archivists, and he tells the story of Harrods, how it used to run. So in this particular story, he then took me through the journey of how menswear started from the 1800s all the way down to the current day. So that was, again, one of the memories that I've always taken from this project. And then that takes me to Australia, which then started the commission to do the Australian GPO, which is still undergoing in the project at the moment. So again, the history and the heritage nature of the project brought us to Australia also. And this is, again, still ongoing. And I love working with heritage projects, because there's so much history and stories that you can gather from in order to approach your design. And the next slide is a sneak preview of what the project is. Unfortunately, I can't show too much. And it is for a hotel project. And the next slide then shows another hotel project. And again, working in the field of interior, we work across multitudes of disciplines, and we work through different narratives to create stories for the projects. Which then, again, the next slide shows, where the job takes me. It can't be to have a project meeting and hike up to Terrigal to have this beachside view for client side. So again, it's very joyful to work in the field that we do in creative design. And then the next few slides then takes me to where I am now. This is a project that I'm currently working on a refurbishment of the tower in Hong Kong's west, which is a residential project. We are refurbishing the architecture and the interiors. And also the next slide then shows another project of mine that I'm working on as part of the bigger team I've made to deliver this refurbishment of a shopping center in mainland China. So then I'll end there, and because I know I've taken too much time, but it's the most exciting thing working in this field is you don't know where's next. And I just want to reiterate, kembali lagi Pak Nizam yang tadi dia bilang, it's time to unlock your creativity. And I think what a best time to be now to be creative, because we're living in such a fascinating condition. And I think this is the time to challenge design, to think forward, and to be able to create new designs that will bring us to the future. So thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Griffin. Very comprehensive presentation, and I hope you're not judging our background right now, yeah, with our interview.
We're all designers, so we would judge.
So I think let's go on to Adrian. Adrian, over to you.
Well, I've corrected Arcky's background sometimes. Anyway, well, thank you, Arcky, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm Adrian. I'm an architect, licensed architect in California at the moment, in San Francisco, working for Dialog. And oh yeah, as a day-to-day basis, like in general, I manage projects, and then we do like some business development also on like what kind of project that we can kind of get. Especially, I think lately we're working in mostly commercial, residential, and also public projects like school projects. And then I'll share a little bit of kind of material also, similar to Griffin. So yeah, like Arcky, I have also a world map. So I started my career in Indonesia. Actually, I graduated from Unpar in Bandung. And then I started my way around, kind of generally journeyed to the west almost. Been in China, in the Netherlands, and then in the East Coast, and then currently in the West Coast. A little bit of stats on like how many years I've been abroad, and then how many projects I've worked on like several different continents. I think I started my career in Indonesia working on like kind of typical projects, villas, houses, and so on. But I kind of wanted to be involved in something big, something more in a larger scale. So yeah, I got it. My first project in China was like a building headquarters for the Pertamina of China, PetroChina, which is 1 kilometer long. And then I wanted to do something tall also, which I happened to kind of get involved also. This is actually World Trade Center 2 in New York. It hasn't been built yet, unfortunately. So at the moment, it's the shortest World Trade Center in the world. So this is a little bit of the design of World Trade Center. It was previously designed by Norman Foster, a London architect, and then we kind of took over. Unfortunately, the foundation has been built right now, so this is still the shortest World Trade Center because it's only up to the foundation. There's a little bit of problem, obviously, with the new design because the old design has taller bits on the other end of the new design. That's why I think the lobby in itself is actually pretty cool because it's actually a torquing moment where actually the foundation meets the new structure and the new building. It's still going, it hasn't been built yet, unfortunately. We've been dealing with like a lot of, we had to deal with Pentagon almost to really deal with the bombing blast zone and so on. So it's kind of tricky. Had also projects in the Netherlands where I designed Shell campus. I somehow lensed myself into designing oil companies campus. And then somehow in California, I was involved in designing a Facebook campus. So this is the massive expansion of Facebook in a 10 years timeline. In adjacent to the older campus. This is also pretty interesting because I get to design Mark Zuckerberg's kind of secret tunnel for them, for him to escape just in case. This is kind of a little bit of the campus in itself on how it's gonna get to be deployed later on. And then all the with all the glitz and glam, tower in New York, Facebook campus in California. I think one of the most rewarding project of mine is actually a village in Africa, which is kind of interesting because it's a museum in Africa for artists, a collection of artists. So why would, an artist? So this is a museum for the artist, not for the visitor, which is kind of interesting. We're trying to kind of give them kind of facility for them to explore the world of arts outside of the local art that they do. So we built them museums where we bring in museum from all around the world. So this is when it got inaugurated. We don't have enough money to actually deploy the roof. And we do also exhibition for them, for the local artists. So this is an exhibition in New York. So we brought them in New York, so we kind of get them a little bit more exposure. I got involved in like several kind of design technology also for architecture. So this is like an auto layout So this is kind of scary, actually. Then do we not need architects anymore, since the technology can design itself almost? And then along the line is also this technology using technology unlike construction methods. So in this case, it's actually to predict the volume of float that you need to kind of level the concrete on the floor. So using the 3D points models, and then you can actually predict on how much that you need. And then right now I've been involved in like my own projects in Indonesia. I'm trying to give back a little bit to Indonesia. So what we do actually to build, to design and build. So it's not an architecture firm, it's a design and build firm to actually build for low and then middle income persons that they can't afford to hire an architect. So basically our mission is actually to liberate architecture to the masses, right? So it feels like architecture is getting more and more unreachable. It's only for the rich people. So we're trying to liberate it by having them access to good, well-designed for lower to middle income person. Yes, that's pretty much it.
Thanks, Adrian. Wow, that's a very comprehensive presentation too there, and I guess if anybody's interested to bangun rumah tangga, well, you know who to go in. It can be both apa namanya, real rumah or rumah tangga ya, Adrian ya. I think to that end, it seems like everybody's like showcasing. This is like now like a designer show, a designer apa namanya kayak face off gitu. I'd like to actually invite John Kudos too, because everybody else are showing their design, etc. John, do you have anything to challenge them or like as a rebuttal? Back to you, John.
Yeah, I do have some things, in fact. Thank you. Let me share my screen. Okay, this is displaying okay?
Yep.
So I'll skip this bit of the introduction because I introduced myself before. But I'm gonna just show you. This is the kind of stuff we do, right? Everything from branding, data visualization, environments, exhibitions, experiences, motion packaging, public insight. It's a long list, and we also work with all kinds of clients and collaborators. And this is sort of our like 1 second an image showcase from last year. And in New York in particular, I work with a lot of museums. So these are a few publications that we did for the Guggenheim Museum. And in DC, Washington, DC, we did work with Studio Joseph, which is an architecture in charge of the exhibition design. And we were in charge of all the graphic components that go into the exhibit. This is a permanent exhibit at the museum. So I think it's intended for a 10-year showing there. It's quite significant. There's a lot of graphic components related to this. This is about the Native Americans and how it's been appropriated, for lack of better words, in the States by a lot of people and a lot of companies. And it's intended to just reveal the culture and how we should perceive that moving forward. Flying to Indonesia, this is a few projects that my team has handled as well for Wardah. Wardah is one of the largest cosmetic brands in Indonesia. So this is a few packaging and branding projects that we've done for them. On the street in Bandung, particularly, this is where I'm from. We actually work with the local city officials to help revitalize, some of this walking culture in Indonesia, which I think is not as great, when compared to how things are in New York right now. So this is one of the early attempts where we create wayfinding signage throughout Bandung City. And then there's a campaign where we attempt to encourage people to use the crosswalk where they are, not instead of crossing everywhere, right, in between the crosswalks. So we try to make it fun because this is Indonesians, right? So we want to make sure that they get it and they actually use it. So this is one of the concepts. What do you call this? Angklek in Indonesia. So it's angklek or hopscotch in American culture. And happy to say that people actually use it and it's been helpful. And this is another iteration of that where it becomes a ular tangga. I'm skipping ahead to, I mean, obviously, you know, I think when I look at what Adrian showed and Griffin showed, design projects for me doesn't last more than a year. And when I heard Adrian talk about 10-year, you know, for beginning to completion, I think that's a huge difference. That's why we actually have so many projects in the works. Now, this is another company that I co-founded. I am managing partner with 2 other firms. So to make it clear, you know, I'm basically in charge of the 2D experimentation and execution, and there's a 3D partner, Robert Desainfal, and Masa Kawamura from Tokyo. He's in charge of 4D. So together, the goal for us is to actually produce projects that involve or fuse all these components into one story or one experience. World map is a recurring theme today, so this is my version of the world map. But this is sort of where we have presence of the company. So as you can see, we have 2 different time zones, at least here. In Asia, we are in the process of opening in Singapore, but because of COVID, things have been delayed. So my 3D partner, just to give you an idea, he did the costume. It's more like a body armor. It's not a costume. It's a body armor for Katy Perry, among other things. He also does a lot of work that's NASA related, going to space. He did interactive costumes for a Cirque du Soleil. And then in Tokyo, my partner Masa did just creative technology components like this. So this is an exhibition of the artist. I'm blanking on the name, but anyway, you walk up to it and there's this sense of interactivity where you can, you know, a self-portrait is generated out of fruits. And then from there, you can actually export it and share it. Let me give you a quick introduction. This is a 7-Eleven project in Taipei. And this is maybe a good example. I wanted to just, this is the last project as well. This video shows you what happens when you begin to combine 2D, 3D, and 4D all in one place to create this really interesting experience that hopefully also life-changing. That's it.
It's always been my favorite, John.
Thanks. Thanks for sharing that, John. I think, I don't know, I think everybody deserves a round of applause, I guess, for all the works that you've done. but I think I like to probably like one thing that I observe from all the works that you've done. I think Professor Nizam mentioned like the fact that creativity is in our DNA, and it looks like what you guys are doing is creating some DNA footprint around the world in terms of design and creativity, and it's so amazing to see Indonesians being able to create huge impact around the world, and apparently like apparently orang Indonesia was behind it gitu. Okay, it's such an amazing story. So to that end, I think a lot of the attendees here are very interested to hear perspectives on how do you enter the industry, what is expected, what should you prepare, apa aja sih yang perlu dipersiapkan gitu if they want to enter the global stage and aspire to become to follow your career footprint gitu. It'll be great if you can share this, and to all the attendees, kalau ada pertanyaan itu ada Q&A box, jadi langsung bisa ditaruh pertanyaannya juga, nanti we'll be happy to answer them. And without further ado, maybe I'll begin with probably Griffin. Let's talk a little bit about interior design world gitu. Apa sih, what is the expectation? Like, what do you need to do?
I think if I may start, for me, interior design, I started in with the world of interiors. The reason being is because at the junction of so many other disciplines, you're next to architecture, you're next to product design, you work with wayfinding, you work with graphic design. And for me, I started in the workplace because at the time, Australia was, when I graduated, Australia was at the forefront, I would say, in terms of workplace design. So that's where I want to launch my career in. And for me, throughout that period, in terms of moving forward to then leap into the UK and take me where I am, it's all about being connecting with your colleagues, connecting with your networks, and building that relationships over the years. And for me, since my first job as a junior, I was putting myself out there in terms of out of my comfort zone, in terms of meeting people, working with different types of characters. And my very first job out of that wasn't through applications. I went up to one of the speakers at one of these events, and literally I wasn't looking for a job because it was the global financial crisis. And for me, it was really, really hard. And I already had a job secured at the time, and I was given a full-time position. However, then I was really curious. All it was a curiosity about this person who was so amazing at her career, building up an amazing portfolio and setting up her own business. So I walked up to her saying, like, how did you get there? And by the end of the conversation, 5-minute conversation, she was like, come in for an interview. And I was like, wow, that's quite interesting, because I wasn't after for a job. And that moment in time then takes me to where I am. It's all about building a relationship and putting yourself out there. And from Sydney to London, again, I was referred to my mentor, who I worked with for 4.5 years. And again, I did look for jobs, but at the end, the job that I ended up getting was all through relationships. So my personal story and my personal journey is very much through being able to connect with people and have that relationship building throughout any stage of your career with anyone, whether it's someone senior, whether it's someone junior. So for me, that was what takes me to where I am now, especially in this industry where you do talk to a lot of people. You just want to connect genuinely, not just being able to do small chit chats, although that is also part of the job.
So surprisingly, I think that's a great point there, Griffin. Surprisingly, people think that the kerjaannya gambar or like really focus on the art, but a majority of it is actually talking to people, right? And like you have to be able to articulate your idea verbally and be able to sell gitu in a way. So interesting points. Maybe next up, I'll invite Adrian. What's your perspective? Like how to be successful and what's expected to become like an architect in a global environment?
I think in a global setting, well, I launched my kind of career out of the blue from Indonesia, right, to China at that time. So it was a little bit like a lot of kind of culture shock, and in terms of just the culture in itself, and also like a lot of shock in terms of the expectation of the job. So I kind of want to build up with Griffin. Also, I think relationship is important. So the way that I got my job in China is also through my friend that used, so I used to work in Bali before, and then that friend, which is an architect, also moved to China, and then he referred me the job. So relationship is really important. But on top of that, I think there's a difference between the kind of skill set that we have in Indonesia. So there's like the gap at that time. So this was, I think it was around the same kind of global crisis also. So it was along the same time with Griffin, I think. And then I think the culture gap and also the skill set gap that was really major was really I think the software skill, the technical skill was really prominent. So it was a lot of shock in that sense also. So I think right now with the easiness of like information, I think it's really easy for people in Indonesia also to build up the skill set through like internet, Googling and then YouTube and so on. So that wasn't there before. So it was really hard to kind of catch up, kind of closing out the gap.
Okay,
so technical skill is also important.
Yeah, thanks for the perspective, Adrian. And I think having a technical skill is definitely a must, right, for this type of role, gitu, okay. So I think maybe I'll also invite John, gitu, okay. John, like how do you see what's your tips maybe to the audience here, gitu, to build such technical skill? I think you raised a point the other day, like it cannot be a 9 to 5 type of thing. This is something that you have to work around the clock when it comes to building your skills. Like would definitely keen to hear your perspectives on this.
Yeah, I think when people ask me what's the secret, that's really hard to say, but I always refer back to this idea of being passionate in what you do. And that's responding directly to the 9 to 5 attitude, right? Because when you're passionate about something, you can't exactly stop at 5. A lot of times you actually just, I need to keep going and make sure this is actually really good. And also my journey is one of resilience. To put it in short, I think when I started going to school, I went to Maryland Institute College of Art in Baltimore. The first year of that, the Asian economic crisis happened in 1998. And my parents wanted to send me home, but I basically said, I need to find a way to stick around, and stay here. And I did that. And that was the turning point for me, because that's when I realized that how I learn is not so much about which school you go to, it's actually the people that surround you, right? And this is for me where you get to grow the most. So after my graduation, that's when I immediately got a job in Pentagram, which is luck, in my opinion. But to many people, I think they see me as like, well, you're hardworking, and you really stick to doing what you do, and that's how I landed the job. And I was there for 7 years. Basically, learned everything, everything that I could there. And when I launched my own company 7 years later, I felt like it was a much easier transition. The only thing that I didn't know what to do is basically the business side of things, right? But when it comes to the technical skills, how to manage client, managing projects, how to do good work, that's all basically my education when I was in Pentagram for 7 years. And technical skills, it's one of those things, because of course, to do your job, you need to be able to design. In my case, it's all about having a really good sense of typography, which is how to use typeface or fonts, and also being able to design systems, right? So when you design a book, for example, you need to be able to understand how to systemize everything so that there's a rhyme and reason to everything. There's a story that you can follow easily, and everything just comes across really nicely. But then from there, being able to take those core skills and actually transferring that to other platforms. Like the kind of work I showed before, it requires more than just graphic design, obviously. There's so many components to that. There's motion graphic, there's software development, but all these things in between is where your characteristic as, someone who's willing to figure these things out will really come through, because it takes a lot to pull together something so sophisticated and so complicated like that.
Thanks, John. And I think I'm interested more as well on the attitude and your point on characteristics as well, like resilience, because I think what is the conception, especially for Indonesians, it's pada malu-malu gitu, or like they're kind of, maybe selling is not the main thing that Indonesians are. I've noticed and I've observed, and many of you would agree, a lot of Indonesians are great designers, but when it comes to communicating, when it comes to selling, it's a different story. And there's maybe some gaps gitu. Okay, any tips that you can share, like how would you bridge this gap supaya bisa on par with the Western designer or the Western architects or Western interior designers gitu? Gimana caranya bisa bridge it? And what have you guys learned and practice over time? So I don't know, whoever wants to take first. Any open question any?
I'm happy to start with this one because I think I completely agree with you. A lot of generally, say, Indonesians who are very much more reserved in terms of their personality and character, we're not taught how to challenge. We're not taught how to question people, especially of your senior. And for me, growing up in many different places, that takes me to a position where if I want to be there, I need to push myself out of my comfort zone in terms of questioning. And I always tell my colleagues, whether it's younger or senior, don't be afraid to ask questions, because me personally, we can't all know everything. Whether you're junior, whether you're senior, no matter where you are, someone will have a knowledge somewhere. And the fact that you should ask questions without being afraid, that is something that's really invaluable. And for me, it is very hard. I remember the very first time I was sort of put myself in the position, am I challenging this person too much? Am I being rude? Am I crossing the boundary? So there's a lot of these questions around your head. And I think for me, it's also questioning while listening. I think somebody said recently to me, it's like you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a certain reason. You listen and then you question. And for me, that's being conscious of how you question, how to deliver your question is really important. You don't want to come across as a prima donna, which unfortunately I've worked with a few of those. But if it genuinely question, I think it's something that is accepted in terms of a wider industry. And for me in my career, questioning as much as listening is very important, because as consultants, we are hired to do so. This is our expertise. And if someone engages to do so, we should have our due diligence to challenge the client of how they should be. But at the same time, for me, and this is what we pride for at Make Architects, we are listening architects. We will listen to you and we'll deliver something of you, not somebody else. So I think pushing yourself out there, and I think smile and be conscious. And every time, sometimes I'm getting conscious, I'm like, oh, am I being too harsh on this person? Is this question too challenging? So that's something that is my own personal experience, how to overcome that challenge.
Thanks. Thank you, Griffin. Very, very insightful. Maybe I'll also invite Adrian gitu. And I noticed a lot of the creative people, and I don't know, not generalizing, tapi a lot of them banyak yang introvert juga kan, compared to people working in consulting, working in banking gitu, yang kayak emang bener-bener ketemu klien terus-terusan as part of the initial requirement gitu, or dari sekolah udah diajarin gitu. But what's your take, Adrian, on this?
Yeah, I think totally agree with Griffin, right? It's really important. But want to also extend that a little bit, Griffin's point, where actually I started with like, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? So you kind of frame it as a question rather than like kind of quote unquote in Indonesian kind of setting it would be counted as offensive, right? And then I think on top of that, also being able to give facts or like kind of arguments, the train of thoughts why you come up with this kind of conclusion, and why you then want to question them back is actually it gives them kind of more rational. So, and then it's really important not only for the client but also for me, like on a day-to-day basis, I would deal a lot with consultants. Because as an architect, it's kind of like the center of where the other consultants would come over, right? Like MEP consultant, structure consultant, and so on. So we need to kind of constantly arguing with them. Well, not arguing, but we're trying to actually deliver our message, deliver our design intents, so for them to kind of understand and also follow along with our design intent. So so being able to give them kind of the rational and then the train of thoughts is actually really important. And then you don't even need to try too hard to argue once they get the argument.
Thanks, thanks, Adrian. Very, very insightful. So I think we've also started to receive some questions from the audience. And again, calling it out, kalau ada yang mau pertanyaan, go ahead, put your question on the question form. Sama jangan malu-malu juga gitu. You can put your name, and then we'll be happy to address you and for your question, and really, really appreciate you juga for engaging in this discussion. I think I'll go with one of the question here that could be a good segue from what we were talking about. I think this one is a question that was just submitted. As working professional designers, what do you think is a good stepping stone to learn about the business side of things? I think presumably this is like your client interaction, looking at the business and beyond the design itself. Like, what's your take in this? Maybe I'll like to probably invite John to respond to this, given that you also run the business.
Yeah. Let's see. I guess I can reflect on how I learned about this, right? Because I think even very specifically in the path of graphic designers, right, and how they end up right in their professional journey, there are many ways you can specialize in different things. But I would say that there are different types of design firms, design agencies, or design practices, right, at different scales, where your role as one of the designers or a manager, for example, in the company is very different. And my own experience when I was in Pentagram is actually a very small team. And that entailed in me getting my hands dirty on everything, right, from beginning to end. So I would go, well, sometimes I would go to the client meetings. A lot of times I would be in the client presentation meetings. I would also be the one making all the designs, right? I would be working with the production team to make sure everything is executed and then everything's delivered on time. So basically end to end, right? And that's how I learned the trade, so to speak. The only part that I didn't learn, which I had to struggle with myself, was running the business. But that's sort of when, after 7 years of being that person who's, who makes things happen, when I started my own company, that's the only thing that remained, like, well, how do I actually survive and actually run the business and continue to do this? And that, going back to what I said earlier, this is about resilience, right? Because I think looking back 12 years ago, I had no idea what I was doing, but because I had the guts to do it, and I'm very open, I'm very, I'm a good listener. I try to get advice from as many people as possible, but I also collaborate with the clients to figure out, what's the best way to make things happen. That's where I am now, right? It's like everything is done through this one attitude, basically. Like, how can I work with them? How can I stay in business, and actually continue to stay passionate about what I do?
Thank you, John. Very insightful. Actually, there is a specific question for you as well, John. I think this one is again from one of the attendees. For John, as part of a multidisciplinary design studio, what do you think? I think I'm trying to articulate this. What do you think on focus? Are you focused on a specific design practice more, or you're running a multidisciplinary one, basically? Like, how's your
that's a very common question as well, because when people ask me, well, do you specialize in anything, I will always say I'm a generalist, but then when I started the studio 12 years ago, everyone asked me, well, okay, you're a design firm, I know you're good, but what are you really good at? And I have no idea, because I always say I can do everything. And that was a hard sell, because no one would believe you when you say that, right? But I think now I can say that and people actually believe it, because I have the track record to show it, that I've done all kinds of things. Now, is it better to specialize or versus being a generalist? I think that's up to, individuals, right? Like, for me, I had always been passionate with design and technology. And you can see that in a lot of my work, it's how everything is combined. But I think, though, as a designer, this is one of those things that I love about being a designer. It's, you can connect that skill to a lot of things in life. I can design my own house. I can create my own business because I know how to design, right? I can work with other people. I can work with artists to create installations. There's so many things you can connect it with.
Thanks, thank you, John. So I think we will start inviting live question juga nih dari attendeenya. So to that end, I'd like to invite Kay Putri. Kay, are you ready for your question?
Hi,
So,
Arcky. Yes.
I think just a quick call out juga. You can introduce yourself, your background a little bit, and feel free to shoot your question.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Arcky. Hi, John, Adrian, and Griffin. It was such really great insights about the industry. Hi, everyone. My name is Kay. I'm currently a second year undergrad studying urban planning and design here in London. So I got a couple of questions here for the speakers. The first set of questions, it will be about getting into the industry itself. So as we all know, the most important part about getting into the creative/design industry, apart from our CV and cover letter, will be our portfolio. So then often for job application, they will only allow you to upload like a maximum 5-page or maximum 10 megabyte of portfolio. So in this case, how do you condense or select your artwork or showcase your work in your portfolio? As in, how do you balance between the quality and the quantity of your work? And maybe this also relate to the point that Adrian pointed out before about the gap between this skill set of students, especially in Indonesia. So do you think like how many effort should we need to put outside from our university project, especially for like applying for a first job once the first time you graduated from school?
Thank you.
I think you can really build up your portfolio from like competition or like kind of like a design exercise that you do outside of the studio itself. So that's one, to kind of build up the projects. Second, I think from the kind of, I think for the entry level, I think the graphic would be really important. So they're really putting attention towards the graphic in itself. So I would go for like ISU or any kind of websites like that to kind of get yourself a hold of like certain design kind of portfolios. So you can grab like a sense of like things that are expected. So sometimes from ISU, ISU is actually a website where you can actually take a peek on like people's portfolio, and then usually they would put down stuff where, oh yeah, I got a job at this firm and that firm. So then you can kind of figure out, oh, if you want to go to that firm, this would be your point of reference of portfolio. So I think that would be a good starting point.
Yeah, so maybe relating to that, the firm. So how do you build your narrative in a portfolio? As in, do you tailor each of your portfolio to based on like each of the company that you're applying to? As in, do you make it in like a similar style to them, or you really emphasize it on your like own style, your own signature in making portfolio?
I think in general, there's a baseline. There's a baseline on like certain like graphics, certain like aesthetic and stuff. And then obviously once you get deeper into like, oh, you kind of know also like you might want to go to like this kind of firm, maybe some firms that deals more like more fun projects rather than like more parametric, more computing heavy projects. So then you started to begin or tailor your kind of design projects along the line. So on top of that, I think I would want to, I mean, if you're not sure yet, you might want to set up your portfolio as general as possible, meaning like I think you can kind of tell also from going through ISU. So there's like a certain graphic standards that's kind of general, but not too specific to one firm, because you don't want to you don't want to funnel yourself into just like one firm, and then if that firm happen to be not hiring, and then you're kind of screwed, right? So you might want to set the baseline as general as possible, but within the kind of certain standards. So that certain standards, you can grab it from ISU. You can kind of tell already by looking like several kind of portfolios.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that I would say also, you have to think about how to stand out somehow. And it's hard when you're playing this passive role of here's my website, please come. That's a very passive attitude, you know. Of course, you need to have a good website. You need to have your portfolio ready, everything ready to go. But getting that, you know, to that next point where you can get an interview, it takes a lot more. So, you know, make sure you got that baseline ready, and then do the work to actually try to connect with as many people as possible. And of course, you don't just connect with random people. I think you want to target it. So you do your research and really like aim for the ones that you're really interested in.
I just wanted to add to John's point as well. I think one of the ways, the best ways to do that, and when I meet people, is to actually showcase what you do beyond your day-to-day. And for me, that extracurricular sort of activities or exercise that you do in terms of, here's my work, A to Z in architecture or in graphics or in fashion and whatnot. But here's also what I do in other stuff. And this is something that I look forward to when I meet people, whether it's pottery, photography, traveling and whatnot, because this is what sparks conversation and how you can connect to people. And I find myself successful in interviews where a lot of the conversations happens at that period, and people, oh, actually, I'm curious now to hear what you do outside, whether it's music writing, whether it's, I don't know, yeah, photography or building something. That's something that is making you who you are. And that is what I think what John would say, something that it makes you different, because everyone who's applying for a job will have a portfolio of design or architecture or graphics or whatnot, but it is what makes you different. And at that point of difference is what will make you shine at the end of the day.
Thanks for the perspectives, guys. I think also, I think we want to, it's very interesting now. We're actually getting more questions now from the audience. So let's jump over that and hash them out. So I think related to a student-related question, one attendee is raising, I am currently majoring in dual architecture and landscape architecture. Want to know how double degree graduates will be treated in terms of our skills, because some are concerned that may not be considered as competent if you only focus on one area. So any thoughts on this? Maybe Adrian, probably you can take this one.
Yeah, actually, it's interesting because I came from, so I went to Penn. So at Penn, so the landscape program is also one of the best in the US. So there are a lot of kind of dual degree candidates. So what's interesting, so you can go aim to either architecture more towards architecture side or more towards the landscape side. So there are also firms that would do architecture and landscape, so like Staheda and also Weissman Freddie in the US. So they're like very specific on both. And then at the same time, firms like One Architecture, they do more like kind of urban, so they do more landscape and then kind of urban design projects. So that's also pretty interesting. So there's this firms that kind of do in between stuff. And then on top of that, you can go for like a larger, more kind of corporate firms like Ecom. So they would do also, because they would have like multidisciplinary disciplines within their departments. So they would do. But yeah, I think by having kind of dual degree program, it really, I think you really open up opportunities for many time.
Thank you, Adrian. And this is a question specific to John. How did you find your first new clients?
I just took anything that I could get my hands on. That's how I started. But that was a bad idea. But luckily, I think because of my my experience working in Pentagram, a lot of people actually recognized the name when I started the company, and it was basically instant credibility for me, right? So it made the conversation easier to bring the client in and provide projects for us. But I would also say that we don't spend any money advertising all these years. Okay, so all the projects that come my way are usually referrals, or they actually invite us to participate in an RFP process. So I think, I think I would say like that's the best type of advertising, where you don't spend any money.
Got it. Thanks, John. So I think we want to do a little bit of segue as well. Like most of you actually have a global career, or like you've been moving around the world a lot, and would be keen to hear perspectives on how did you execute that in more details gitu. Okay, I think similarly we do have some questions as well, like how do you transition to a global company if you're based in Indonesia. So would like to hear some perspectives on this from perhaps Griffin and also Adrian.
For me, in terms of working across the region, I just put myself out there. At one point, Australia was getting a little bit flat for me because obviously being isolated, there's only so much you can do. So that's when I wanted to go to Europe. And Europe has always been the hub of design for me in terms of the discipline that I am, whether it's products, whether it's interiors, whether architecture, it is very much where you can get it. So literally I packed up my bag and go. And it's that sense of adventure again that I mentioned earlier, that you should have and put yourself out there in that uncomfortable position. Is now that I look back at that time, yes, there was a scary adventure, but it all paid off in the end. And then moving back to Australia was also another personal decision. And having that option was given to me because also, again, that resilience that John also mentioned earlier, because I don't mind working hard, and I was very much appreciated by my colleagues in UK, and so they offered me whether I wanted to stay or whether I wanted to go to Australia. So I decided to go back to Australia to spend a bit more time at home, but then I figured out that coming back home was a very different experience to after you live abroad. And then I had a secondment in Hong Kong for a couple of months, and then again I worked my ass off there during the 2 months there, and then my colleague then asked me whether I wanted to come here permanently. And after that return to Australia, I decided, yes, I do want to be in Hong Kong and I want to try something new. And again, that longing for something new have always been embedded in me. It's that challenge, that's what's next, what can I do more, and whether it's bigger scale, whether it's smaller scale, whether it's fast to build, it's just progression that I long for. So that's what drives me to go, dot around the globe to try something new. And lo and behold, I do get something new every time I come here. And that is a knowledge that is very much quite rare to get.
And is there any specific tips that you can share on how do you get the gig? Probably like that's probably like people are very curious. Like, I mean, some of us have experienced that. Usually it's like by luck, but if there's any specific examples yang bisa mungkin di-share gitu ke teman-teman, that'll be amazing.
Yeah, for me personally, from the very first job that I have, it was applying to crazy amounts of positions, advertised or unadvertised. And my very first job as that junior, it was a position that wasn't advertised at all. And so I grabbed it, as soon as I got it. And then the second one, as I mentioned, I was meeting someone through an event. And then soon after that, that was through my colleague. And to London was also through my colleague, who then, hey, if you want to go to London, I would recommend you to go to Make, and that's how I got through. And then within internally Make, it's just building relationships again through the internal colleagues. And for me, that is something that was my path. But in terms of your starting scratch, I would recommend in terms of just getting yourself out there, because as John said, you can't be passive in this industry. If you want to stand out, you have to put yourself out there, especially in a place where it's very competitive, and it is very hard to get into a position that you want. But you do have to go through that hardship first before you get to where you want, because without that hardship, you can't expect to get somewhere there, and that resilience really is required in this industry.
Yeah. Jadi kayak mesti build reputation dulu ya until you can pull that off gitu. So until bisa nyampe ke situ. Maybe juga dari Adrian ya. Adrian udah nyasar ke China, Belanda, New York, terus San Francisco. Ini udah kayak mudiknya udah bingung kemana nih Adrian berarti. So would be keen to hear your perspective on how did you execute that?
Yeah, I think in general, jumping into kind of global scene, especially in the star architecture scene, the kind of star of the architects, I think the easiest would be through internships, because that would be kind of the easiest kind of pipeline to get in. And then once you get into just one of them, so they're like kind of a gang almost. So once you get into one of them, and then it would really open up opportunity to the rest. And then the architecture firms, they're like all around the world, right? Tokyo, and then Europe, obviously, in the US and somewhere else. So I think that would really opens up opportunities to kind of jump around, especially. And then what I think in architecture in particular, it's a bit difficult once you go towards like kind of later career, because obviously you would somewhat specialize or getting licensed in specific areas. And then it would be a bit difficult to, it's a bit regionalized. So then it's a bit difficult for like, you wouldn't know like the building code in China. You wouldn't know like the building code in like somewhere else, right? So it's a bit tricky to kind of move around. But I think the reason why I got mine in the US is because it's a bit like superior to like in Asia, for example. So they would always think, oh yeah, you're licensed in the US. Obviously, it's more like you have like certain credentials, so they would be more open towards like getting into getting us towards back in Asia, for example. But at the same time, I think in Asia, in China, especially, design architects would work with local design institutes, so you don't necessarily need to know that much for local code. So then you can instead jump into firms that are more towards just design. So they're just doing like the first half of the projects of the design phase, and then they pass it over to the kind of the technical side of things. So I think you can jump around within that realms also.
Gotcha. Thank you, Adrian. And maybe a little bit as well on this topic, because like it seems like you need to have reputation, you need to build your network, and I think when I'm looking at John, you have like multiple initiatives as well around the world with cabang-cabang of your work in Taiwan, in Tokyo, etc. Like how do you build the network? Like maybe like I mean, how do you, because you can connect somebody, you can be out there, you can reach out to them, but it seems like all this thing you have to have a long-lasting relationship with many people and many stakeholders gitu. Like how did you maintain that amidst your busy time or busy work?
Well, oddly enough, I don't have to maintain everything, right? I think it's about having the right people to lead the right projects or the right team. I mean, I'm a managing partner of my own company, and then when I started the CASA, that's actually more of a partnership, you know, and between different agencies that are already established. And both partners that I collaborate with are actually long-term friends of mine. And we sort of understand, you know, that we have similar passion in, you know, the kind of work that we want to do. And we all acknowledge that getting the project is always the hardest thing, you know, but for us creatives, we're all makers, right? Once we have the project, it's like, we're going to roll. We're just going to get it done. It's going to be awesome, right? So the partnership for us is really about having people who you can completely trust to run projects and teams, you know? And for me, I don't have to check in with anybody really, and you know, except the ones that are working under me. But that's how we actually started, you know? And for us, this is quite easy to maintain long term.
Thanks, John. And continue again, like I think there's actually a theme that I'm seeing from the questions list. Basically, it's the difference between working in large companies or large architectural firms or design firms versus small ones. Like perhaps this would be an interesting perspective, and maybe if you can add in a little bit of differences and nuances in different countries as well, that'll be great as well. I think we can begin with Griffin probably.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to do that, because I started in a 30-odd company. No, actually, I lied. The very first one was 150, and then I moved to a 30-odd, and then I went to UK back to 150 plus, and went to Sydney, which is around about 20. But because Sydney was part of the bigger mate, there was 20 within the 150, and now I'm in Hong Kong, which is slightly smaller than Sydney. So I've been in a small, in a big, and a small within the big. And a very different point of view. And I think John touched on this a bit earlier, whereas in your small firm, you have to be a generalist. You have to be able to do everything and anything that comes your way. And for me, starting in that scale of company gave me a lot of leverage in terms of skills beyond design. And touching on the business of design, I started my knowledge since then, having to run my own projects and reporting invoicing to my seniors, to my managing director, and making sure invoicing is run properly in terms of how many people, how long the team needs to run for. That was very much a source of learning lesson for me quite early on at the beginning of my career. And then went to UK, which is a big company where I was very much solely focusing on my own projects, which was quite nice because, you know, I can actually put my heart and soul into the detail of every design, and I'm going to be the team, and I can just report to finance, and everyone has their own work silos to work in. Coming back to Sydney and Hong Kong with Make, the fascinating thing, I'm back to that small, the nature of a small company, even though we've got the backing of a bigger firm in UK. And for me, the joy of what I do now, there's no 2 days, not even 2 hours that's the same. I could be sketching a detail at 2 hours, another 2 hours I could be preparing for a bid, writing a fee proposal, reading a contract, talking to finance, designing again, doing a layout. So it's a joy to be able to do that. And I'm very much like John, where I love being a generalist, being able to touch on every single thing rather than focusing on something. And it's a choice that I've made, that I actually enjoy the progression and the variety of work. So the big difference for me is big companies, yes, you will get big projects. You will get exposed to very much exciting big projects. At the same time, you will be working with a bigger team in the industry. Smaller companies, smaller projects, smaller team, but you do get the skills that you might not be able to get in a bigger firm. So that's my own 2 cents on that, from what I've learned throughout the last 15 years or so.
So I think we have a very few minutes left, and probably we'll have to pass it back to the MC in like 3 minutes. So any comments from Adrian and John in these perspectives as well? If you can make it brief, it'll be great. Jadi we have a chance to share your thoughts to the audience. Maybe over to you, Adrian.
No, I think Griffen kind of touched upon most of the points. I think that's pretty great. I think one thing that I want to add personally, when I kind of move around within a bigger or smaller firms and so on. So smaller firms, I think generally I made a conscious move to jump into like a way small firm. So I was involved in like 20 to like almost like 10,000 people firms before. But I think smaller firms, because I think my skill set is a generalist also to begin with, and then it's much more useful in a smaller firm. But also at the same time, I'm starting out my own firm, so that would be really important, because Mark Zuckerberg wouldn't give me a Facebook campus to design, obviously starting out. So that's also so getting involved with like smaller scale projects, and then how do you kind of approach to get like smaller scale projects. So that would be kind of on the transition mode for myself also.
Thank you, Adrian.
Yeah, I can add. I think what Adrian was talking about, you know, like when I started, I had no expectation of working with big clients, right? But I think by happenstance, within that first year of starting my own practice, I got to work with MoMA, Museum of Modern Art, Sotheby's, the auction house, you know, and that was due to my credibility, right? And when I was a designer in Pentagram. But then over the years, it was all about building my own image, you know, the company's image and the identity that people would recognize. That's when, you know, over the years, and it took many attempts, that's, you know, where we are now, we actually can take on the larger projects. So that probably is one big difference, right? For, you know, the difference between working with smaller teams or larger teams. But also the day-to-day is very different as a designer, right? Because in larger teams, your task is very focused on very specific things. For example, you do UX design, okay? So you make it really awesome. This is what you're supposed to do, and then it moves on to another team after that. And the task could be, you know, enjoyable, but it could also be flat depending on where you are in your career, right? And what kind of experience you're looking for. And also with the bigger the projects, the longer it takes for you to execute and to actually see the outcome. So if you're interested in portfolio building, I think, you know, that you have to decide, is this am I going to stay here 3 years before I see anything done, right? Or am I going to stay 3 years and get 100 projects done? So that's really something you want to consider as you're approaching different companies.
Thank you, John. So I think we are really approaching the end of the hour, but I do want to say thank you so much to John, Griffin, and Adrian for having your Sunday for a couple of hours spending time sama kita ngobrol-ngobrol. To all the audience, thank you for attending juga, and hopefully this is a meaningful and insightful session to you. I would like to extend thank you to Prof. Nizam juga for having a very insightful opening remarks, and also to IPA USA team for also collaborating to support the event. I think I'll pass it over to Bianca.
Sure, thanks, Arcky. Yeah, that brings us to the end of this event. Thank you again to our speakers, participants, and also supporting partners for making this event possible. And to all participants, if you have not filled out our post-event survey, the link is on the chat box below. And if your questions have not been answered, don't worry at all. All of your questions have been recorded and with us now, and we'll be getting them to our speakers, and they'll be answering them, which we'll then share via email. Thanks again, everyone, for tuning in. Our next Going Global series is scheduled for July 2021. And in between them, we'll have other events as well. So stay connected with us. Follow our Instagram, Twitter at GIPA_ID, and also our YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Thank you again, and until next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks, Griffin. Thanks, Adrian. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Steve.